This is Bob Capetta from the College of the Florida Keys, and this lesson is on the quadratic formula. So let's take a look at the following example. 2x squared plus 5x minus 3 is 0. And let's see if we can factor this. Remember, it's a quadratic formula, so we expect to have two solutions. I believe this can be factored. 2x squared here, minus 3 up there, plus 5x down here. So 2x squared is 2x times x. 3 times negative 1, so I guess positive 3 here. Negative 1 here would work. Negative 1 times x is negative 1x. 2x times 3. Positive 6x minus 1x is 5x. So I get 2x minus 1 times x plus 3 is what's on the left side of this equation. So we'll say 2x minus 1 times x plus 3 equals 0. So if that's the case, either 2x minus 1 is 0, or x plus 3 is 0. Adding 1 to both sides, 2x is 1, dividing by 2. X is 1/2 over on this side, adding negative 3 to both sides, x is negative 3. So sure enough, we get two answers. We get 1/2 and negative 3. But here's the thing. Most quadratic equations cannot be factored. But I'm going to go ahead and solve this with the quadratic formula and see if we get the same two answers. Will we get the answers of 1/2 and negative 3? So again, our question is 2x squared plus 5x minus 3 equals 0. Now, what is our quadratic formula? Worth memorizing. X, or whatever variable you have, is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So we've got to decide what is a, what is b, what is c. A is the coefficient on x squared, so our form is ax squared plus bx plus c. Sorry about that. So looking at this then, a is 2, b is 5, c is negative 3. So we're going to go ahead and plug those numbers into our formula. Our formula again, x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So x is negative b, negative 5, plus or minus the square root of b squared, 5 squared, minus 4 times a, 4 times 2, times c, times negative 3, all over 2a, all over 2 times 2. So we get x equals negative 5 plus or minus the square root. 5 squared is 25. 8 times negative 3 is negative 24 minus negative 24. All over 2 times 2 is 4. So we get x is negative 5 plus or minus, that's 25 plus 24, root 49 over 4. So we get x is negative 5 plus or minus 7 all over 4. Now, what is that going to become? Well, then we get x is negative 5 plus 7 over 4, and x is negative 5 minus 7 over 4. X is negative 5 plus 7 over 4, and x is negative 5 minus 7 over 4. So what do we get? What do we get? We get negative 5 plus 7 is 7 minus 5, 2. X is 2 over 4. Or negative 5 minus 7, negative 12 over 4. Well, negative 2 over 4 is 1/2. So x is 1/2, or negative 12 over 4, or x is negative 3. So our answer to that question is 1/2 comma negative 3. Now, that's the same answer we had with factoring, but remember, we cannot solve all quadratic equations with factoring. Most we can't solve with factoring. But certainly if you can solve with factoring, you better get the same answer with the quadratic formula as you did with factoring. Okay, let's take a look at another question. This time let's look at x squared plus 6x plus 4 is 0. So we're going to go A, B, and C. So A is going to equal 1. B is going to equal 6. C is going to equal 4. So our formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Make sure we know our variables again. A is 1. B is positive 6. C is 4. So x is negative b, negative 6, plus or minus the square root of b squared of 6 squared minus 4ac minus 4 times 1 times 4, all over 2a, all over 2 times 1, which equals negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 36 minus 4 times 4 is 16, all over 2. So we get x is equal to negative 6 plus or minus 36 minus 16 root 20 over 2. So we should probably simplify root 20. Root 20 is root 2 times 10, 2 times 5. The 2's come out, and that's 2 root 5. So we get negative 6 plus or minus 2 root 5 over 2, which is negative 6 over 2 plus or minus 2 root 5 over 2. And then we get x is negative 3 plus or minus root 5. Remember, those are two answers. X is negative 3 plus root 5, or x is negative 3 minus root 5. And let's go ahead and write those in curly braces. Those are our two solutions. Negative 3 plus root 5, negative 3 minus root 5. So you'll notice the answer is irrational. So that original equation could not have been solved by factoring. It doesn't factor. So if you're given a question that doesn't factor, the quadratic formula is a strategy you could use. You also could have solved this with completing the square. So both completing the square and quadratic formula are essentially equivalent. They will solve problems that cannot factor. But quadratic formula and completing the square can solve everything, those that factor and those that don't. Okay, let's do another one. Let's take a look at x squared minus 4x plus 13 is 0. So again, we have to identify what's A, what's B, what's C. So A is 1, B will be negative 4, C will be 13. So let's write all that down. A is 1. B is negative 4. C is 13. Our formula will be x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So x equals negative b, the negative of negative 4, careful with the signs, plus or minus the square root of b squared, negative 4 squared, minus 4ac, 4 times 1 times 13, all over what? All over 2 times a, all over 2 times 1. So next we'll get x equals the negative of negative 4 is positive 4 plus or minus the square root. Negative 4 squared is 16 minus 4 times 13 is 52, all divided by 2. So continuing with this, we get x equals 4 plus or minus the square root of negative 36 over 2. Now what about the square root of negative 36? What is that? Square root of negative 36 is the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 36, which is I times 6, which is 6i. So we get x is 4 plus or minus 6i over 2. X is 4 plus or minus 6i over 2, which tells me x is 4 over 2 plus or minus 6i over 2, which tells me x is 2 plus or minus 3i. Remember, these are two solutions. So I get x is 2 plus 3i, or x is 2 minus 3i. And then we like to write our answer in set form and curly brace form. So again, it's quadratic. Remember, you have a second order, a second power quadratic equation. You typically have two answers. So our two answers are 2 plus 3i and 2 minus 3i. And that will conclude this lesson.